even watching a movie that is intense, your adrenaline goes up. I think your adrenaline goes up, but also your cortisol goes up. Here's what happens when you are video gaming and potentially even with television watching that is intense killing. You feel excitement. You enjoy that to some degree, and video gamers, they're enjoying it. Otherwise, of course, they wouldn't be doing it. However, your body is interpreting it as stress, as real danger. And so also your cortisol levels are higher. So then we are seeing in any age, but especially it's shocking in younger people, we are seeing metabolic syndromes come up. I want to just give people hope. We are hearing so much about the problems that screens create, the Anxious Generation book and the problems that I've brought up here. We have, mental health problems, relational problems, academic problems, and it's just super depressing. So I always want to say, there is hope. You can do this. This is an addiction, but it can be conquered and managed and taken care of.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome back to the Life in Transition podcast. I'm very excited today to have a guest that's expertise that's really an important one for us. Her name is Mary Catherine Liscinski, and she is a counselor, a life coach, and a digital addiction coach. And all of us, to some degree or another, are digitally addicted today, whether we want to admit it or not. So Mary Catherine, I'm very excited to have you with me today and to hear about your life and your transition in this area. Welcome to the Life in Transition podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Art. I've been looking forward to speaking with you and sharing with you and your listeners. This is going to be great.
Awesome. Thank you. So jumping in as we often do, or always do really on this podcast, is what has been one of the biggest transitions that you've been through in your life? Most impactful, maybe most important, most meaningful transition that you've been through in your life?
Well, I think when I started my own counseling business, that was a huge transition. I had been employed at a few different types of places as a counselor and finally decided it was time to go out on my own and have my own business. And so that was a big step, but looking back now, I see it as the right step.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when was that you stepped out on your own? How many years ago was that?
That was in 2017. So quite a few years.
Yeah, so you have some good experience now. What is like one of the key takeaways you've had from that? What's one of the key learnings that you've had from making that transition to your own business from working for other centers?
Well, my goal, which has turned out to be true, was to be able to make my decisions based on what is best for my clients. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted that to be the number one focus. Not that is not a focus of agencies or hospitals like I worked at before, but they have other competing allegiances that they have to follow. Okay, along with putting what's best for the client first. And so you have that juggle all the time. And so having my own practice, I can, very truly put the client first as much as possible. And that's what I love. I love to be able to adjust and do things that will just benefit my client as much as possible. And that's what has happened. And that helps me to not burn out in my work as well.
That's a really great point. Have you had experience with burnout as well, Mary Catherine, or not?
Not extreme, but I have felt it to some degree. And I can understand how someone could very easily burn out in this field of counseling and coaching.
Absolutely.
So I know it could happen to any of us, but I think that having my own practice helps to prevent burnout.
Right. And good on you for thinking about that before you burned out. Right. I didn't think about burnout much until I had burned out. Okay, right. Which a lot of people do. So good for you to be thinking about that and planning and thinking about how to be sustainable in doing what you love. Mm-hmm. Oh no, that's wonderful. So it sounds like that you're really happy with that decision to make the change out onto your own.
I have been very happy with it. There are things that are not the most fun. As a business owner, I am responsible for everything. If something goes wrong, it's clearly my fault. Okay.
Right.
So on those hopefully rare occasions, I point at myself. And so that can be tough sometimes when I wish there was someone else to lay blame on, but that just doesn't happen. So then I have to work it out myself and correct any mistakes I've made. So that can be a challenge. So it's not 100% fun, but it's a lot more fun than having to work under someone else.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think I have a very good friend who's a coach, and he was a guest on this podcast a while back, Vince Fowler. And his tagline is embrace the suck, right? You want something really good, but there's going to be things that suck to get there.
Sure.
So you have to embrace those parts as well,
Right.
if you want to have the good stuff that comes out of that. So talk to me about your counseling practice specifically. I mean, I'm personally very curious about this digital addiction counselor. Like, what does that mean? Who are the types of people that you help, and what do you do with them to help? And how would maybe, what does it mean? How would you define a digital addiction as well for you from a professional perspective?
Well, sure. I can give you some definition of a digital addiction. But I think as well, we don't have to necessarily call it an addiction. I think we are all prone to overuse, right? And so even overusing, basically, my first part of the definition would be, is your screen use creating problems in other areas of your life? And if you say yes to that question, something's off, okay? Overuse, addiction, whatever we want to call it, something needs to be adjusted. And so there are other symptoms that you can see either in yourself, or these may be more directed towards seeing them in a teenager or a child, but withdrawing from other people. Okay. I want to be in my room by myself with my screen doing whatever it is.
Right.
Anger. I know parents out there who have tried to limit screen time, and all of a sudden there's a meltdown. And that proves that there's too much attachment to that device.
Right.
You should be able to remove something from your child and not have a giant meltdown. But that giant meltdown, again, indicator of too much attachment. For younger people, lower grades due to a lack of ability to focus. We can talk about how screens can create ADHD symptoms.
Right.
Or communication skills, less eye contact. They're not having the literal practice that they need for face-to-face communication that they obviously need in school and eventually at work. One of the saddest things is that they're not as happy as they used to be. I'm sure you've probably seen just that, what I would call zombie face.
Yeah.
Just that flat affect, as I call it as a counselor, but zombie face could be another term. That's not supposed to happen. Children and teenagers are supposed to be those of us who are, the most full of life and
the most expressive, whether it's up or down. You would expect them to be the most expressive, right?
And carefree, the fewest number of responsibilities ever, because once you're an adult, the responsibilities just pile on, and so they can have just that full of joy feeling. And when you're just seeing that flat zombie face, that is not normal, and it needs to be changed. Don't just accept that as, oh, that's the new generation. They're just all like that. No, it's not okay. It's not okay. If you're a teenager or if you're a teacher and you're seeing this in your students at school, it's not okay. It's a sign.
Okay. And what about even for folks my age, right? MidLife, when you said if it affects other areas of your life, right? So if I'm playing a game on my phone when I should be sleeping,
right,
that's already affecting another area of my life, right? Even if it's not that major, it's still, taking away sleep is, especially at 53, it's, it's harder to sleep later in the morning. So I need to make sure I'm going to bed at a good time. Right.
Right. So not only are you cutting down on the number of hours that you're sleeping, but then you turn off the screen and you still can't sleep. And even when you're trying to sleep, and there are multiple reasons for that. But again, when anyone of any age gets a bad night's sleep, the next day we're, cranky and grumpy and can't work, can't study, can't focus. And so then the lack of sleep affects your whole next day. And that is not good. For younger people, a lack of motivation. I'll go back to another, bad example of the 25-year-old laying on the couch and they just don't want to get up and do a thing. Well, that can be from, first of all, too much dopamine. We'll talk about that. But then too much dopamine then leads to dopamine depletion. And everyone needs a little bit of dopamine for that motivation to get up and go and do anything. And so the screens are causing the low motivation. They didn't just decide, oh, I want to lay here. They can have, again, that low dopamine. They're really fighting those addictive properties. So that's another one.
Okay, and I get that. So you said that too much dopamine is what leads to the less dopamine. So talk me through that. I've read a lot in this space, but that's the first I've heard of that. So I'm really curious.
Right.
I understand screens, you're going to get a lot of dopamine because you're constantly getting some sort of hit. Video games the same way, right?
Right. Yes. So screens, whether it would be social media or video games, act on the same addictive pathways that drugs and alcohol do. So if you take the example of a substance, someone takes a substance and they have a dopamine spike, and then after a little bit it goes back down, and that makes you want to get another hit. You want to take another dose of the drug, right? Well, video games specifically, you get on the video game, you have that dopamine spike, but then it actually plateaus and stays up there the entire time you're playing the game, and then when you stop, it comes back down. So you are really overusing your dopamine for a very long time. So then the body is reacting to too much dopamine, so it downregulates, as we say, and doesn't produce enough to try to counteract
because you have it senses, hey, wait a minute, dopamine levels have been high for hours, not for minutes.
We've got to lower down here.
Okay. And that's where the demotivation can come from, the lethargy.
It's not enough. And so then you don't have the sort of get up and go to do the normal life functioning activities that you need to do. So it really acts on that pathway.
Let me ask a question about that then. Are all video games reacting on the same way, or are certain ones better than others? Are FPSs much worse, or they keep your dopamine much higher compared to some other types of games, or, are they all created equal?
I have not delved that deep into it, even though I'm also a problematic gaming specialist as well. That's another certification I have. But I don't think it's necessarily important to make those distinctions. But that's kind of my personal professional opinion, if you will. There may be some professionals out there who make those distinctions. For me, all of it is so bad, I don't really care. I just lump them all together and say they're not good. I'll tell you this as well. I had heard from a couple of different sources that the military uses video games to train their soldiers and desensitize their soldiers to killing and to violence. To violence. And so I had heard that they used that in training. But then recently I heard a story. This gentleman was telling me he was a former military person, retired now, and he said that the military actually went to the University of Michigan and asked them to develop a game. They said, we're having some soldiers in training here in boot camp who are having trouble pulling the trigger. Can you design a game for us that will help to desensitize our soldiers? And so they did. And then the game designer at the university was like, hey, let's market this and sell it to the public. And that's what Call of Duty is. So it was designed originally for the military. And so I'm like, that is scary. Like, we are giving our kids something that was designed to desensitize them to killing. And in my mind, that's just not okay.
Right. Interesting. I've never been a fan of video games, but a lot of people are. Both my sons play a fair amount. Mm-hmm. And there's been some studies, I think, and there's lots of studies showing the downsides, but there's been some studies even recently showing some upsides. Whether it's in hand discipline and some other things that you can get. And you've probably seen the movie. I don't remember what it's called, but maybe Nismo or something, but it's where the Nissan made a sponsorship where people could come from, racing Grand Theft Auto, and come into the racing program. And one kid did that and won their manufacturer's cup. Right. So there's, it's not something that I've been, I don't enjoy. I tried to play with my son some, but I never could get into it. Mm-hmm. And I also don't handle violence and horror movies and stuff well. I don't like putting that in my brain. But there is some. But that's what I was trying to pick, to understand if there's a difference in the quality of the video game or what you're doing with it. I'm also curious. Then, does watching movies have the same effect on you? I mean, I can tell the difference in myself, the type of movie that I watch. Right, if I'm watching a Liam Neeson thriller, that's Taken or something, then my adrenaline, I don't know about my dopamine, but my adrenaline is up, and it will be the whole time. And I can't sleep well after that. Whereas if I watch something different, a rom-com or something, it's very different effect on the chemical balance I feel in my body.
That's a good point. I'll have two things to say there. Number one, again, I'm not going to split hairs about this type of video game is worse than that one. That's just, I'm not going to get into that. But at the same time, I would say that, first person shooter is probably the worst, as far as how it affects you psychologically. But as well, now my second point was, lost it.
It's okay. It'll come back in a minute.
Yeah.
But so video games, and if we come back to it, if it's a screen addiction, if it's creating problems in your life, regardless of what it is that you're using as the substance, it's not good.
Right. You mentioned even watching a movie that is intense, your adrenaline goes up. I think your adrenaline goes up, but also your cortisol goes up. Here's what happens when you are video gaming and potentially even with television watching that is intense killing. You feel excitement. You enjoy that to some degree, and video gamers, they're enjoying it. Otherwise, of course, they wouldn't be doing it. However, your body is interpreting it as stress, as real danger. And so also your cortisol levels are higher. So then we are seeing in any age, but especially it's shocking in younger people, we are seeing metabolic syndromes come up. So weight gain, high blood sugar, prediabetes, all of those types of issues that used to not exist at all in the younger population. But that high cortisol, again, maintained for long periods of time, the body under stress, it's not good. Again, the person is feeling enjoyment and fun, but the body is sensing danger. And no one needs to kind of sit in a stressed out state for hours and hours and hours.
Right. So they're feeling the thrill. I don't know if necessarily enjoyment and fun, but they're feeling the thrill like you would have if you just, ran with the bulls, but that only lasts for 5 minutes.
Right.
But if they're doing that for 5 or 6 hours a day, then it creates serious chronic metabolic issues as well.
Right.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And would you qualify movies and stuff in the same way or not?
Not exactly the same way. Another training that I took was from Boston Children's Hospital, and they called this issue problematic interactive media use. Okay, so they distinguish the interactive versus the passive. Watching TV is passive, sitting there. Interactive would be video games, social media, things like that. And so that, to me, the interactiveness does put it on another level as far as what your body is experiencing and as far as the level of addictive properties that it has.
Okay. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by MidLife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, and we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. Okay, so it does have a difference from that perspective as well. Okay. No, it's interesting. So what advice would you give if somebody recognizes, and before we go there, I think, a lot of people might have a problem with the word addicted. I noticed you said that it can just be problematic use. But if I heard, I think it was Chip Connolly when he was on here, I'm not sure if it's somebody else, but said if anybody could never be more than a meter away or a yard away from their wine bottle, from their liquor bottle, there'd be no question that they were alcoholic.
Right.
Like there'd be no question. If the first thing that they did in the morning was take a sip of booze, and the last thing they did at night was take a sip of booze, there'd be no question that they're alcoholic. Like nobody would debate that.
Right.
And yet we all almost, maybe a few exceptions, but almost all of us do that with our phones.
Right.
Right. Almost, I don't remember the stat, but like something like 90-something% of us are never more than 3 feet away from our phone.
Right. Right.
right? Including when we're sleeping.
Right.
All right. So that's, I mean, something to say that no matter what you're thinking, whether it's a problem or not a problem, think about that a little bit. Are you okay? Like I love the study I also heard recently about, I'm really into authentic connection and authentic conversation. And there was a study recently about the depth of communication that people have when they're having a meal together. Mm-hmm. And that if you have your phone in the room with you, if you don't leave your phone in the car when you go into the restaurant, the depth of the conversation is about half, even if your phone is turned on silent and face down.
Yes, I've read those studies as well. They did an experiment with people and gave them some sort of task and were assessing their stress level and things like that. And even if they had their phone off, face down versus out of the room, there was a difference. Just your very, subconscious knowledge that your phone is there made a difference in performance.
Exactly.
And it would make a difference in your relational connections. Yes.
Absolutely. Because you are thinking you might be called anytime. So you're not really giving your full attention to that other person that you're with. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, quite frankly, is we don't even recognize how much it's stealing from us in a way. And there's a whole bunch of ways where it interferes with connection. Even beyond that, just it drives the society of ordering everything instead of going out to eat. You order food into your home and eat by yourself, or you order on Amazon instead of going to the hardware store. So you don't have those social interactions. You talked a minute ago about people that are really addicted to their phones, not even are being developed with the phone. They're not even able to have conversations with people. But part of it is also because this frictionless app society where we don't interact with people near as much as we used to, because you don't have to go out of your house for anything. You can just do it on the app and it'll show up at your door. And you don't even have to talk to the delivery person. They don't wait. They don't wait to see if you got it. They ring the doorbell and leave, right? They're off to the next one. So there's a lot of ways where even if you wouldn't consider yourself a digital addict, that if you're not feeling well, if you feel your own zombie phase, if you feel your own dysregulation or lack of sleep, maybe take a good look at, how that's going. I did an experiment recently where I didn't order anything online for a week. Like I just said, I'm not going to order anything. No Instacarts, no Amazon, no nothing. And it's so convenient and so easy. It's really easy to do. Mm-hmm. And I definitely had a lot more connection. I went to Home Depot, right? I didn't just order it. I went to the grocery store. And those little connections actually are still social connections that make us feel better, right? There's a ton of research about that too. It's just interacting with people, just talking with somebody makes you feel better. So that's really interesting. I also did an experiment where I did zero multitasking. Nice. Which digital stuff is often multitasking. So I did zero multitasking, and that was awful, I have to say, and wonderful, both, because I didn't realize how much of my social life is over a screen.
Okay, right.
And how much of it happens, and I don't mean social media. I use almost no social media. But I FaceTime with my brothers and my sisters and my parents and my wife's parents and my kids and, so forth. Mm-hmm. And I do not with FaceTime, but with talking on the phone too, which is the biggest way. And sometimes with FaceTime when I'm running or when I'm driving the car, I won't FaceTime, but I'm doing, I'm talking on the phone while I'm driving the car. And often it was a way where I was also multitasking, right? Like I thought I was efficient. Right? Like I'd get in the car, and even if I didn't have something urgent, I would call somebody to be busy and, fill the quiet time. Right. Right. So when I didn't do that for a week, it was amazing how lonely it was for me, because I realized how much of my social life comes from while I'm running or driving and using the phone in that way. And when I wanted to talk to somebody, I actually would stop and pull off the side of the road. Say, if it's important enough, then I'll just wait. My trip can wait. I'm going to be present with that. And then I'll talk to somebody. Wow. But it was really interesting. But I also noticed, I lost 5 pounds that week. Wow. Because I was never having any other task going on while I was eating. So what was I doing? I was paying attention to my food, paying attention to my body, tasting it, eating slower, chewing a lot, and noticing when I'm full instead of having Sports Center on at lunch and, and stuff in my face. Right? We can do that. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, you brought up a great point. Number one, just we need face-to-face interactions with people. We need people that we're close to, emotionally close to, but then also, the person at the grocery store, like you said, that counts. We need a smile, from a stranger counts for a lot. At the same time, when you started talking about multitasking and when you started talking about being in the car by yourself and like just letting that be a quiet time, we also need to be able to tolerate complete stillness and alone time a little bit, because I think nowadays people, if they really sit down to be mindful, which is one thing that I think is very important for our health, they almost start to get antsy and anxious and can't stand it and they have to go do something.
Right.
We have lost the ability to just sit with ourselves, to focus on what are my 5 senses taking in, what's going on in my mind, and to just be ourselves for even just a little bit. We need that, but we are just rushing through our days and going to sleep and rushing through the next day, and that is not good for our health. So both of those are true at the same time. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I know I did my first silent retreat in 2019, and it was mind-blowing, right? And it wasn't even like a Vipassana yoga retreat. So I still read, I still wrote, I just didn't speak at all. I meditated a lot. I ran a lot. I hiked a lot. I read a lot. I journaled a lot. But that processing was amazing. And some of the breakthroughs I had there were insane. And it was only 5 days.
Wow.
But one of the things that I learned from that zero multitasking week is that I now, anytime I start on a run or a drive, the first 15 minutes, I just leave silent.
Nice.
All right. Just pay attention to the birds and the grass when I'm running, or the sky or the trees.
Yes.
And in the car, just to be present, just to be still, just to be silent, look around, pay attention, be mindful. And then anytime I start one of those things later in the day, and sometimes I forget this, is to just give myself 5 minutes. Like if I have the thought, oh, I should call, well, just wait 5 minutes. And if 5 minutes later, is it still important to do that? Or can I put on some music and enjoy that instead, or just enjoy the silence? And that's also really helped with, being more sustainable, I think, for myself, is to not, because my pattern, my addiction, my primary addiction is workaholism. Those that listen to this podcast now, they know that.
Okay.
And so that's my addiction, is to always be doing, right? It's not a video game, but it's always be doing, always. So putting those pauses in lots of different fractals are really important. Right. The small silence, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, as well as once a year taking a silent retreat, right? Going to hike by myself in the woods for a week or two. Those type of things are really crucial. So what if someone recognizes now that we have broadened the scope of problematic screens a little bit here? If somebody recognizes that's a problem, what do you recommend for them to do?
Well, that kind of depends on whether it's an individual adult or if it is a parent who is concerned about their teenager or child. And so
let's cover both of those. You can take them whichever order you want, but let's cover both of those, because I think this, my primary audience is people going through midlife transition, which means there's an issue for themselves as well as they're raising kids, right? And the kids are coming toward adulthood and they're wondering what that is.
Right. So if it is an individual adult, first of all, I would just ask them to sit down and list, what are their priorities in life, right? What are their, maybe main 3 things that they want to focus on? And then think about, okay, how does screen use incorporate into that? And if it is encroaching on my main goals, my main priorities, we have to back up. Another more detailed way to do that is to write out a typical day for yourself and figure out, like, how many hours are you generally awake per day? So let's just pretend it's 16 hours you're awake and 8 hours you're asleep. That would be nice, right?
Right.
So
that's what we ideally would be doing if we're taking care of our health well, right?
Right. And so then if you look at, okay, how many hours or minutes per day am I on a screen? And then you take that as a percentage of 16 and say, okay, do I want to spend 10% of my day on a screen, 20% of my day on my screen? I don't think so. I have these other priorities that I've just thought through to say I want those to be first. And really, what percent of the day do you want to be on a screen? I think hopefully for most of us, it would be very small, which ends up being a small number of minutes. And so I think that helps to wake people up and say, okay, it really has to back down. I'll diverge for just a second, because teenagers and children even tend to, spend so many hours per day on a screen. If you spend 3 hours a day on a screen, over your lifetime, that equals 10 years. And for some people, some teenagers, they're on a screen 6 or 7 hours per day.
Yeah.
And so over their lifetime, that is sucking off so much of their life. So anyway.
Well, teenagers as well. But, the average retiree in the United States spends 47 hours watching television.
Right. That's sad. That is sad. And so I think, first of all, we need a wake-up call. Then, for more practical things, definitely, like you said, no screens while you're eating at all. No screens while you're eating. That's just a basic, easy, is not necessarily easy, but it's very clear to say no screens while we're eating. And also, this is an even bigger one.
Let me ask a question about that, because
sure,
it's 100% logical and always enforced when I'm at a table with other people. But what about even when you're eating by yourself?
I would say it's better not to. But, that might be a time, when you could, but I would say it's better not to.
I already shared about my experience with losing weight just by enjoying my food instead of shoveling it in, right?
Right. And that's a good point. That is one time when you are doing one activity of eating. And then just like you said, paying attention to your 5 senses, the smells of your food, the taste of your food, going slowly, that's going to help our digestion, which is going to help us overall. So I would say, stay away from it if you can, if you are eating by yourself. And then also, this one's even harder, but it's also pretty clear, no screens in the bedroom. The bedroom is for sleeping and, potentially for homework for, younger people. But we need to associate the bed with sleep and not the bed with thinking or scrolling or entertainment, things like that. You want your body to associate the bed with sleep. And so, again, no screens in the bedroom for anybody, because that just creates so many problems. With my phone, I delete so many apps that I do not use. I just click delete, just over the whole thing basically. And then, it is paused.
I can still hear you fine.
Okay, maybe it paused on my end, so I'll keep going. So with my phone, I just delete so many apps that I do not use, don't want to be tempted by, don't even want to know they exist. I just delete them. Even with apps that I do use, I don't put them on my home screen. And so that provides a little bit of a jump for me to say, okay, this is, a teeny tiny bit of effort that I have to make an intentional decision to go on this app. I also have almost no notifications on. They're almost all silenced. And that way I go to my phone when I want to. My phone's not calling me to this little ding and that little ding. I would go crazy if everything was dinging all the time. I think, and that is just going to turn us into a crazy cycle or something.
Talk about that with watches as well.
Right. Yes. Right. I think that's, we're just instantly drawn to whatever the ding is. And I don't think that's healthy for us. So, and with my phone, I'm trying to think of other things that I do. Go ahead.
I just wanted to push back a little bit or challenge a little bit. And I know that all the sleep research says don't have any screens in the room, don't have a TV, don't bring your phone near bed with you. Mm-hmm. And I also think that's, if I'm just having completely natural sleep, that's absolutely the right way to do. I use my phone a lot for sleep stories or sleep meditations or sleep music. I have an iMask that has speakers in it.
Okay.
And that or I'll do a yoga nidra to go to sleep.
Right.
Is best practice then to put my phone somewhere else, start it, and then put my headset on and go to bed? Would that be the right way to do that if I want to use some app like that to help me sleep or to make sleep noises or something along those lines?
I think so. If you're using it as a sleep aid, that could be an exception. However, if someone is of the mindset of just going completely natural, of course, it's not natural to have something like that. And so someone could argue that, zero electronics in the bedroom is the most natural thing. But, if that is initially helping you to get good sleep, then good sleep counts for a lot.
Right.
So I would say, that could be an exception. So my phone is in my bedroom at night, but it is on the other side of the room. I can't see it. I have it turned on do not disturb at night.
Yeah, of course.
So only Only a couple of family members could reach me through the phone in an emergency, but everyone else is silenced. Okay.
Yep.
From between, in the evening up until, the next morning when I wake up. And so it is in the room, but it is totally all the way across the room from me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I think, definitely having your phone set a timer where the do not disturb automatically comes on an hour before bedtime and stays on, if you have some good morning practices, an hour after you get up. That do not disturb should stay on. So you have your time for your meditation, your exercise, your cup of coffee, your walk the dog, the things that you like to do for yourself before you come back to being an addict and a slave to your digital device, your digital tether.
Right. We can have a little bit more peace of mind in the mornings before we go on that scroll, if you do. Right. And so that, just waking up and thinking about a new day and what are your goals? What are you going to do that's healthy for yourself, for your family? That's so important.
Yeah, before you're reacting to somebody else, letting somebody else set the intention for your day, right? Which which half of it is garbage anyway, or 95% probably is garbage that's coming across your phone overnight.
It is, and it's just too much information. Our brains are not designed to intake that many bits of information per day. It's unreal how much information we intake, and then no wonder our brains are overtaxed and we're having memory problems and all of the things that come along with that, because there's just literally too much information in there, and the brain has trouble sorting it out and figuring out what's important to keep. So, yes.
No, makes sense. So, you've given some good strategies, take some apps off your phone, take them off the front screen, use do not disturb, leave your phone out of the bedroom. What are some other things? And if you're speaking directly to young people or to parents of young people, what are things that they can do that are best practices to help their kids not to be part of this? And I'm sure you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's book of this anxious generation that we have, which is largely attributed to letting our kids, it's more than just screen time, sort of letting our kids be raised by the craziest people on the internet.
Right.
And instead of a village around them and face-to-face that's really looking out for their best interest.
Right. I have read his book and he makes some good points, even though so much of it is just very depressing. It's true that screens are really robbing children of what we would consider to be a normal childhood. The way we grew up is actually critical for child development, for their brain development. And so first of all, for parents with very young children who aren't on screens very much yet, I would say hold off as long as possible, letting your child have access to a screen, using a screen, having a phone, just as long as you can hold it off, the better.
So 10, 8, 15, 20, what, when you say as long as possible, what do you mean?
Right. So for, I see, too many infants using an iPad or their, parents' phone just as entertainment at the dinner table at a restaurant. So don't use the iPad or the phone as a babysitter. I know it's extremely convenient and easy, but do your very best to not use that, because in generations past that wasn't available and we somehow are still here, right? We grew up. And so... And
in mental health perspective, much healthier than we are today. Much healthier.
Yes. And as far as phone use for a child, the good thing now is there are companies that are designing phones specifically for teenagers, that they do have a screen, but they do not have the hard wiring for the internet. So your child or teenager can have the phone to call or text you, and you can set, they can only call back and forth with these specific numbers. So you can control that so that they have that, peace of mind, safety when they're at a friend's house. And so that I would definitely start with that when you want your child to have a phone for safety purposes. And then again, just hold off as long as possible before giving them a phone with internet access. I would say, for allowing social media, I would say age 17. Wow. I really would, just because their brains are not developed enough to handle everything that comes on the internet and social media. And I think that just even had that little bit of time at home before they potentially go off to college, because some parents talk about, we need to supervise it to help teach them. Well, that doesn't take very long, especially when they're an older teenager. So now I know that the big argument...
How long would you think you would recommend for that? Would it be like 6 months or something that you oversee, help them set up social media, set them up following the people that you want them to follow, or that it'll be good for them to follow so they don't get so much garbage in their feed? Or what would you say is best practice for that?
as soon as you let them on social media, then continue to monitor it and help, interact with them as much as possible. I would say this, don't just be their friend on the platform. You need to have their passwords.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
so you can see what's all on there. Now, you're also, again, kidding yourself if you think you are seeing everything that your child is seeing or talking to. Like, you can't, 100% monitoring does not exist. Okay.
Right.
But
for sure.
You can do the best you can, but I would say monitor it until they're gone, until they're 18 and gone. And they're like, that won't happen anymore, that you just do it as long as you can. So
this episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you're looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle Coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. Yeah, no, and I think, there's screen time limits and stuff, and there's also smart kids that know how to work around those, but that still can help. And you can still, I have a family plan, and I can still see that even though two of my kids none of them are minors anymore, but two of them are still in the family plan because I like the benefits of that. Then I can still see what their screen time is and how they're, at least by category, where they're spending their screen time.
Great.
I heard one recently that I want to share from a dear friend of mine. She said that when she set her kids up with phones and with screen time, she set up their screen time, set up their social media accounts, kept them on her phone as well with their logins, but also set them up with all the good influences, all the stuff that she was following, that's good. So that's the first feed and first hits. And she went to all those from their accounts before she gave them their phone. And I thought that was also pretty smart. So you start sort of a good feed instead of a bad feed in the beginning, at least. Right. And then of course she can see everything. If she wants to, she can go see all the histories and everything because she logs in as them.
Right.
Things that I didn't think about when my kids, I was very lucky in a sense that, we had a very strong personal relationships at home. We never had screen times when we were with each other, et cetera. And so my kids never got sucked into the social media thing. And I'm really lucky for that, but they've never felt, that they define themselves by or worry about what other people think on social media. It's just not been a thing for them, which is great.
That's awesome, but it's the extreme exception.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. And I'm not quite sure why, because I downplayed it myself. I don't use it a lot myself. But I think if I had to guess, it's mostly just because of the intense connection that I built with my kids.
Yes. I believe you're correct.
In the real world.
I would, yes.
Right. Because I don't know why else. Right. But and we talk about all of my kids. We talk about everything all the time. So if there's something coming up on social media for them, they would bring it to me first before they would react to it on social media when they were younger. So I feel really lucky about that. But I still think there's a lot of negative impact, especially on my boys, from the amount of screen time that they have, and on me, quite frankly. It's not that negative because I don't spend that much time on screens, but anytime I miss an hour of sleep at my age,
right,
because I'm on a screen, that's not healthy for me. And it was interesting when you talked about the metabolic change too, because I wonder if that's affecting the physical health of my kids as well.
It really
which
could
I'm curious
be.
about.
It really could
and I'm curious to get the cortisol checked at different times during the day. Right, there's fairly easy saliva tests you can do,
right,
and send in at different times in the day and see how the cortisol levels are. I'm curious about that as well. So I may run that with my boys as well. At least one of them I think might be interested in that.
Experiment. Right.
Exactly.
I wanted to go back to something with parents. Another piece of this that is critical is, if at all possible, for your children and teenagers to have other people their age to interact with face to face in person. So if there is another family who's also like, hey, we're going to drastically reduce screen time in our home, or we're going to hold off on allowing social media until age 16 or 17, band up with that family and get together. And that really helps children to not feel like, well, I'm the only one without social media, or I'm the only one that you're not allowed to this or that. And so that at all possible, I think, even if you don't know someone now, it might not take too long to find another family, because families are waking up and saying, hey, we need to do something here. This is not okay and not normal for our kids.
Yeah.
And so
and
that
schools are
really
starting
helped.
to now. I think is wonderful. I mean, my kids went to very good public high schools, but very, very good ones. And I won't say they encouraged phone use in class, but there was the calculator. They would have notes. They would have, stuff. So they more or less encouraged it in class. And now, and there's a lot of schools, especially in Europe, their phones are not allowed in the school at all, period.
Now,
and that's, I hope that comes through the U.S. in a tidal wave where phones are not even allowed in the school, period.
Right. Over 20 states have now said no phones in schools starting in the fall of 2025.
Wonderful. That's a huge step.
Yes. Over 20. And I haven't kept track after that number 20, but it's going to be the case here in Arkansas where I live, and many other states. So that is good, because they do not need their phones at school.
No, absolutely not.
Schools are for learning and face-to-face interactions with friends.
Yeah. And it's not about being a kid. I got my executive MBA when I was 30 something. Okay. And when we started it, they gave us a laptop. Because it was partially remote, partially, and we used it in class, right? That was expected that and then you could even follow the professors and so forth. Halfway through, and this was only like an 18-month program, halfway through, they canceled it because they could see the detriment of having internet access computers open in front of us while we're trying to learn. Right. Because half the people weren't following what's going on with the class. Half of them were getting pulled in by something else on their computer.
Right.
So it's not just kids, right? None of us need to be tempted like that.
I saw that too when I was in grad school. People would have their computers up and they'd be playing solitaire or who knows what. And I was sitting there with my, college-ruled notebook writing notes for the most part. I may have had my computer a couple of times, but I did not use it for note-taking and therefore was not tempted. But yeah, they were doing other things.
And it's funny with the advent of AI, that AI can take all the notes in the world for you, summarize everything. It's fantastic. It's professional. It's great, except that there's something about taking notes yourself that bakes it into your body, right? We've been doing this for hundreds of years.
Handwriting, yes.
Yeah. It's interesting where I was at a conference recently. They were talking about building a strong business network. And the people that were speaking, like when they asked, what's your CRM and what's this? Oh, the company uses this. But for me personally, I have a journal and I meet somebody, I write their name down and I thought that was really interesting. These people are sort of the experts in this space and they're still making notes. And I love doing that myself, right? I still make notes by hand.
That's good.
Right. So it really makes sense. So, if you were to give one tool to our listeners that would really make the biggest impact for them, something they can start doing right now. Like they could say, okay, I'm going to pause this podcast right now and I'm going to make this one change that's going to really help them to lessen their digital addiction, to lessen the damage to other areas of their life because of screens and technology. What would that tool be?
I think I'm going to have to say 2 tools, and maybe the second one isn't a tool, but I'm going to stick it in there. But the first one I would say for an individual adult, or if you're a parent considering your own use and members of your family, I would say, again, do an inventory of what are your goals? What do you actually want to focus on? What are your values as a family? How do you build those? And then look at your screen time that your phone can usually tell you over the past week, you averaged X number of hours per day. And then,
And
think
that's only
about,
on the
right,
phone. I also want to caution people, that's only on the phone. If you have a
right.
PC or a gaming console
Mhm.
or a TV, that's additional
Too.
screen time, right? Which can also be quite
Yes.
significant.
Yes, yes. If you add up all of your devices, all of the time you spend on it. And so I think the first being the wake up call and saying, okay, I need to reorder some of these things, and I need to start setting a time limit on, say if you're an adult and you're going to stay on social media, set the timer for 15 minutes. And then when that timer goes off, turn it off, right?
And you can put
so,
time blocks on your phone, at least on
sure,
Apple phones. I know for social media, you can say after 1 hour, it's blocked,
it's gone, right?
or
Yeah, and
15 minutes or whatever the
can
case
do that
is.
on the computer as well with certain websites. And so I think just that initial taking an inventory and saying, okay, here's what we're going to adjust, here's what we're going to do more of, and we're going to do a lot less screen time, right? And so you need to focus on, what am I going to do more of? That makes all of this a lot more positive, because again, when we deprive ourselves of screen time, it feels bad, whether,
Right.
it can. And so, I mean, again, that's just a sign of how addicted we are, but you want to focus on the positive as much as possible, and talking with your children about brain health and saying, here, we want to give you the best opportunity for your brain to be the best that it can be, and here's how, right? And so,
Right. We wouldn't feed our kids alcohol at 12 years old.
No,
Right.
no, we surely would not. And so the second
And
part,
yet we do that to some extent with the screens, where we give this open, and it's not just the attention and the damage and stuff that does. It's also, they're learning from influences that are way outside of our control that we don't know about. Right.
I have seen, families just be devastated by their teenagers talking with strangers online, and their teenager does a 180 from their family's values to 180 degrees away from that. And the parents are like, we had no idea that this was happening right under our own roof.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really true. So the first one is really to be intentional, to think about what is it that you're wanting out of life, which is a good process to do regardless. But so because right now we're just being distracted, and then probably not, and then seeing how much time we are living in distraction versus doing the things that we want to do, and focus more on the things that we want to do. That's the first one.
Right.
Okay.
And the second point I wanted to make, which may not actually be a key, but I think it is an essential part, and that would be, I want to just give people hope. We are hearing so much about the problems that screens create, the Anxious Generation book, and the problems that I've brought up here. We have, mental health problems, relational problems, academic problems, and it's just super depressing. So I always want to say, there is hope. You can do this. This is an addiction, but it can be conquered and managed and taken care of. And, to those parents out there who have said, I've tried to control screen time in my home and it was just a giant fight and I gave up. I couldn't do it. I want to say, don't give up, and that's why I became a coach, to say, if I can focus specifically on this area, maybe I can really make a difference in the lives of families and individuals, but I'm thinking families specifically. If I can help that one area of the family life, it could make a big difference. And so I want to be there for people who say, hey, I need some individual personal help here because I've tried and it was too hard. And I say, no, don't give up. It's worth it. It is hard, yes, but it is worth it for yourself and for your kids. And
I think the same thing, if we had somebody that we love, whether it's another adult or a child specifically, that we wouldn't give up if they had some other very damaging thing going on. Right. We wouldn't give up if they were addicted to cocaine.
No, you wouldn't give up.
I mean, unfortunately, we might lose them at some point because they don't want help. Right. But we wouldn't give up on our end.
Right.
We wouldn't say, well, it's really okay that they're an addict. Right. We would do everything we can for them. So that's really great. No, I really appreciate it. Speaking of which, and what you do, where can people find out more about you? If they want to connect with you, where can they do that? Well, I was going to laugh and say social media, Facebook or Instagram, but yeah.
I'll tell you this real quick. I went to a networking event one time and I was telling this lady that I'm now certified to do digital addiction. And she was so excited and, oh, that's so cool. And she's like, do you make videos about it on TikTok? And I was like, no.
Yeah, it is sort of funny, and there's part of me is like, yeah, you shouldn't. But then another part of you is like, well, that's where you're going to reach maybe that's where the people are that need your help too. Right. So
I'm in a real bind here. But anyway, no, I'm not on TikTok. So you can reach me the old fashioned way. I have a phone number. It is 501-290-7132. call me up and I'll see how I can help you. If I can point you in some helpful directions, and that would be great. So just call me up and get to know me. Or you can go to my website, which is lifewalkcoaching.com. The walk is WALK. So lifewalkcoaching.com. You can find more information about me there if you want to do that before calling me. You're going to call me anyway. But those are ways that you can reach me.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you for being on Life in Transition podcast today, Mary Catherine. It's a really important topic, and I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate that. And I hope that it also really, this affects everybody, whether we want to admit it or not. This affects everybody. And so I hope people really take to heart and take some of these actions that you're talking about. I really appreciate you being here today.
Art, thank you so much for having me, Art. I have enjoyed conversing with you, and I hope that this reaches people who it can inform and encourage and just be of help out there. That's what I really want.
Awesome. Thank you. I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.